Hello, tomorrow we want to make the roast goose. For that we already need to prepare something today, namely marinate the red cabbage. For that we need red cabbage, orange juice, red wine, lingonberries, apples, pepper, salt, sugar, juniper, cinnamon sticks, cloves, bay leaves and allspice. First, we'll cut the red cabbage. I suggest wearing disposable gloves since red cabbage is very colorful and that'll stain your whole hands. It's a bit hard to get off. That's why just use some disposable gloves like these. We have a large half head, so we'll quarter it by slicing down the middle. And then generously cut out the core. Cut it off diagonally here. And it's very important that these thick fibers are cut off a bit more, because that's what doesn't taste so good in the cabbage later. These slightly thicker parts, we'll do the same with the second one now. So here, just cut across once, and then to make it easier for you to cut, we'll break the head down into different layers first. That means we remove a layer here and lay it down flat. If you have a grater like this at home, a so-called mandolin, you can of course also do this with a mandolin. That way it gets thin. Now we'll cut it with a knife, remove a layer and lay it flat on the board. And now with the knife, always try to cut it into strips as fine as possible. Always be careful with your fingers. Let's set that aside. These pieces are thicker and a bit tough, so I'll put them aside for now. I'll just cut up the rest of the cabbage now, then I'll keep going like that. Just slice it here and then cut it up really finely. I'll cut this now and see you soon. Now we've cut the red cabbage really finely. You can really see here that it's very fine. Then we'll cut the apple next. For this, I used a relatively sour apple. So peel around in a circle. If you want, you can also add a bit of fresh orange, peel it and add pieces of orange. A bit of fruit always goes very well with red cabbage because it just gives it a fresh character. Then we'll quarter the apple, and then it's done. It doesn't matter if the cutting board is a little dirty from the red cabbage, since the apple will be mixed in and turn purple anyway. Then I'll cut out the core. A Boskop apple is ideal due to its acidity and is especially good in winter. When they're in season, or if you make it around Christmas or so, they're perfectly ripe and taste just amazing in red cabbage. And now just cut the quarters in half lengthwise and then slice them into slightly thicker pieces. Just so that when we cook it tomorrow, the pieces fit perfectly on the fork. Have them and decide. And then it's all done. Just the last one's left. And now we can already add the apples to our red cabbage. Then I'll put on some disposable gloves again, so I can mix it all together nicely with my hands. You can use a wooden spoon, but the glove makes it a bit easier. Now red wine goes on top. Next, orange juice. Sugar is important because we need sweetness. Then add a few cloves. A cinnamon stick. A few allspice berries. Use 1 or 2 bay leaves depending on size. They're strong, so use cautiously. These are small now, but if they're large, 1 is enough. And a few juniper berries. But only add a small amount of those as well because they have a very, very strong flavor. 3 pieces are enough for this amount. Now add salt and pepper. And most importantly, lingonberries. That's perfect. It pairs perfectly with the lingonberries' slight tartness and tastes wonderful. Now knead everything together really well with your hands, kneading the red wine and orange juice a bit into the cabbage. That's why the gloves again. Okay, once that's really well mixed and kneaded a bit, then we make the surface really smooth and even and press it down so that all the cabbage can really marinate in our liquid. It comes up a little bit. And now we cover it with plastic wrap and put it in the fridge to marinate until tomorrow. When we start the goose tomorrow, we can also prepare and cook the red cabbage then. It just tastes much better when it has really soaked in overnight. So now I'll show you how to make the goose. For this, we need our marinated red cabbage, red wine, oil, goose stock, salt, pepper, a goose, cooked grated potatoes, raw grated potatoes, potato starch, tomato paste, leek, nutmeg, carrot, celery, apple, mugwort, onions, and egg yolk. First, I cut up all the vegetables for the sauce and the stuffing. For the sauce, I've now prepared what's called a mirepoix. That's carrot, leek, and celery. I've washed them well and don't need to peel them since much of the flavor is in the peel. There's a lot of flavor in the carrot. Just trim a little off the front and back here and then simply cut the carrots into rough pieces like this. Then I have a celeriac here. I peel it a bit because it often still has a lot of dirt on the skin. I just slice it thinly, removing a bit of the skin all around here. And the pieces are about the same size as the carrot. Now I'll cut this lengthwise. And then here. Cut into rough pieces for the sauce. It will be removed later, so even cuts aren't needed. Then an onion. Just chop it up roughly as well. Then the leek, we'll also just cut that into rough pieces. There's still some dirt, so I'll rinse it again. And I'll add that as well. That was basically our vegetables for the sauce. Now we'll get the filling for the goose ready. For that, I have some tart apples here and 2 onions. I quarter the apples with the skin on. They're already washed, and you don't need to peel them because there's a lot of flavor in the skin. Now let's take a small knife, cut out the core. Of course, you can also use an apple quarter first, so you core the apple and then quarter it. That works just as well. You can, if you skip the filling, some people leave the core in, so the filling only flavors the goose. And the filling is thrown away afterwards. Then, of course, you can leave the core inside. But I especially like this filling with onions and apples. That's why I always make it so you can eat it too. And now we just cut the quarters lengthwise like this, and then into slightly larger pieces. And also have the onions lengthwise once, and then just cut them twice. That's enough, even if it's cut roughly. Okay. Now add our mugwort. That's a very typical goose seasoning. You absolutely have to use it because it gives that really extravagant flavor. Now I'll just strip a little off the branches like this. And then we'll add some salt and pepper to our stuffing. Mix it well. Okay, that was the stuffing. Now we can start stuffing the goose. For that, I'll use a pot to help me. If you're doing this at home, just get someone who's in the kitchen to help you. I don't have a helping hand right now, so I'm going to use the pot and just place the goose in here so I can season it on the inside. Lots of salt and pepper, but no meat inside. You don't need to worry about using too much. The real issue is using too little. So really season it well with salt and pepper. It's tough alone, but much easier with 2. And now we can put our filling into the opening. When you buy the goose, there's something called Gänseklein inside. It's a bag that contains the giblets and the neck. Of course, you have to remove that beforehand. You can use it to make a nice sauce, for example, or use it for another dish. But of course, make sure you don't accidentally leave it inside because it's in a plastic bag. Now we add our filling here. Keep pressing it in a little bit at a time so we can really get a lot of the filling in. Wonderful. Okay. I'll put it on the record again. Really nice drum, okay? And now I'm going to cut off the wings on the sides, these long things here. There's relatively little meat on them. I don't throw them away, they go into the sauce, but for the whole goose, I prefer to cut them off. It just doesn't look as nice if we serve it whole. That means just cut through here once. And now just fold it here. Then cut along the edge here again, so to speak. Then this wing here is left over, and we only use it for the sauce. We'll do the same on the other side. Score it once. Then break it and cut through. Now we'll tie up the goose a little bit. We don't have to tie it up in the classic way. That's totally enough if we just tie it up at the front so the stuffing can't fall out. I'll use some kitchen twine for that. You have to make sure the twine isn't waxed, otherwise it'll taste a bit strange, of course. It should be kitchen twine. And now you press these two flaps of fat together a bit like this. And now these two legs here, cross them like this, so to speak, and keep them relatively tight. And now we simply tie a string around it. Here. So that they almost overlap. Right? Another knot to keep it secure. And that's perfectly enough. That's tied well enough. Now next, you first preheat the oven to 170 degrees with convection. The twine is tied. Now we can season the outside with salt and pepper. Also salt it well. A bit of pepper, we don't need too much of that. Now let's preheat a pan where we can sauté the mirepoix or these roasted vegetables. I use a splash of neutral oil like sunflower or similar, just not olive oil. Pour a good splash in here. Now add the vegetables. I'm adding both wings to the mirepoix. They'll go straight into the pan too. And I'll fry those a little bit as well. It'll probably take about 15 minutes until they get a really nice color. I'll finish frying this and then show you how dark it should be. Then we'll refine it with tomato paste, stocks and spices. More on that soon. So now we've fried everything until it's nice and crispy. Now I'll go ahead and transfer the wings over to our roasting pan. And you can already see this is really nice. I mean, for a vegetable, this would already be too much browning. For a sauce, it's perfect. We need those roasted flavors because they add strength and power. Now next, the tomato paste is added. Tomato paste is very acidic, so sautéing it helps reduce the acidity. Just right over here. And now let it sauté for about a minute. Exactly. And now we'll deglaze everything with goose stock and red wine. First, I take the red wine and let it come to a boil. Once it's boiling, I can add the goose stock. You can already see what a great color the sauce has, even though we haven't added the goose stock yet. Later, we'll have a nice dark brown sauce. Now I'm adding the goose stock. You can also just buy it ready-made in a jar, or you can make your own goose stock. A jar is perfectly fine because most of the flavor from the goose really comes out of the goose itself and drips into the roasting pan. Now we pour the whole mixture into the roasting pan. Let's add a bit more water to the pan, simply to really get all the flavor out of the pan, so to speak. I'll pour that over here as well now. Now simply spread the vegetables. And now we can put our little goose on top. Yep. It's so big it only fits diagonally. Now we'll bake it in the oven for 3 to 3.5 hours until it's golden brown and crispy. Now next we'll prepare the potato mixture. As I mentioned earlier, I've already pre-cooked and grated the potatoes. I'll show you the thickness I used. Here's what I have. Here are the raw grated potatoes. I grated them using this grater with the small holes, so be very careful with your fingers. And I grated the cooked starchy potatoes using this grater here, which makes small strands. And combining these two types of potatoes gives us our dumpling dough. I'll show you that now. Potatoes brown quickly when exposed to air, so grated potatoes discolor fast. There's a little packet in the supermarket called Knödelhilfe. Just add a bit of that to the potato mixture. That's what I did here too. That way it stays nice and light in color. Then you'll end up with a nice big fluffy yellow dumpling. Of course, you can also use a ready-made dumpling dough, but in terms of taste, it's just no comparison to a homemade one. It's not as hard as people say. I'll show you. First, I take the raw, finely grated potatoes. I have what's called a straining cloth here. If you don't have something like this at home, just use a clean kitchen towel. But make sure it doesn't smell like any kind of detergent or anything like that. It just needs to be clean. And this mixture, it's just grated for now. All the liquid is still inside, so to speak. Now I'm going to put it onto this towel. Overall, then I squeeze it back into this bowl here and I press it out as firmly as possible. I want to have all the liquid from the potatoes in this bowl, and here in my cloth, basically just the dry potato mass. We have to keep this liquid that's running out here because the starch from the potatoes settles at the bottom of the liquid. And we also want to add this potato starch to our mixture. That's why we're doing this here. Let it sit in the bowl for a short while until the starch has settled. Then we can pour off the water and add the starch to the mixture. Okay, now our mixture is very dry, hardly any water comes out anymore. Then we'll set it aside. Now I have the cooked potatoes here, the finely grated ones. And now I'm mixing them with the finely grated raw potatoes. To that, add egg yolk, salt and pepper. And very important, a pinch of freshly grated nutmeg. Nutmeg is simply a must with potato dishes. Not much, it's intense. And then we add a little extra potato starch as well. That's just as a precaution so that the dumpling or noodle holds together well. We'll save a little bit for later so we can thicken the sauce a bit afterwards. Now we'll mix everything well by hand. It's important that you knead it a bit. You don't want to have just the raw potatoes in one spot and only the cooked ones in another. That would be a bit suboptimal. Now we'll add the natural starch. What I explained to you earlier, we've let it sit for a bit, and now we're carefully pouring it off here. And we'll add this little bit as well to the dumpling mixture. That was a little too little. Honestly, there are some potatoes that leave a bit more behind, so just to be safe, I'm going to add a little more potato flour now. Just a little bit, and I'll work that in. We don't want the dumplings to fall apart in the water later. Okay. The dumpling mixture is ready. We can start shaping them. To do this, we simply make nice big dumplings. We want 1 dumpling per person later. And we shape them into rounds, always in a hollowed hand, and then just roll them. Place them on the plate, then chill again later. Since our goose needs more time, about 45 minutes before it's done, we can take them from the fridge and cook them in boiling salted water. If the mixture sticks to your fingers a bit too much, just moisten your hands slightly with a little water, and then it works wonderfully. Of course, if you prefer, you can also make 12 small dumplings, for example. That's no problem at all, instead of the big ones. Then they don't take as long to cook, and that's fine too. The ladies probably won't be able to manage such a huge dumpling, so it's better to make the dumplings a bit smaller for the ladies. The last one. Cover it with plastic wrap, and I'll show you how to prepare the red cabbage. Now we're going to prepare the red cabbage. For that, we put the whole mixture with all the liquid into the pot. Careful when you pour it in, it makes terrible stains. So be a little careful with your clothes, especially if you're wearing something white, because it's really hard to get those stains out. Okay, that's another thing to keep in mind. And now we're going to slowly bring it to a boil and let it cook for about 60 to 90 minutes until it's nice and tender. Yeah, it usually takes about 70 minutes. And in between, we keep brushing the goose's skin with its own juices. I'll show you that now too. Always skim the fat off the top of the sauce, whatever floats to the top, and keep brushing the goose with its own fat, so to speak. Everywhere. Make sure that this stock gets everywhere. And you all repeat this process now about every 30 to 40 minutes, brushing it on again and again. To make the goose crispy at the end, we need to do it more often, otherwise cook it as shown. The goose needs about 3.5, 4 hours, and you should brush it every half hour or so. And make sure to watch the cabbage so it doesn't burn, because if all the liquid has evaporated, it can burn. At first, there's nothing to worry about. Just keep stirring and watch carefully. I'll cook the goose for 2 more hours, then we'll meet again. Next, I'll show you how to cook dumplings, season red cabbage, and use goose gravy in other ways. The goose has been in for nearly 3 hours, about 2 hours and 40 minutes. Now let's finish the cabbage. The red cabbage is now fully cooked. As you can see, there's still a bit of juice at the bottom. Now we just take the remaining potato starch that we kept, add a bit of ice cold water to it, stir it until smooth, and then use it to slightly thicken the cabbage. Then it gets a very nice shine. I'll show you. Just stir it around with your finger, then you'll notice if there are still any lumps in it or not. The rest of it, we'll use that to thicken the sauce. You always have to add it to a boiling liquid so it can thicken. So just add a splash of it now. And now this potato starch will thicken our liquid marinade, so to speak. And that stays beautifully wrapped around the cabbage, and then it gets a wonderful shine. And you can already see that now. Do you see how the sauce beautifully wraps around the cabbage? Then we can go ahead and put some water on. The water needs to be well salted for the dumplings. So really don't be shy with the salt. If the dumpling water is too blandly salted, then the dumplings won't taste as good afterwards. Okay, and then we can slowly take the sauce out of the oven and start getting it ready. So it's just in the oven without sauce at the end. Otherwise, there's quite a lot of moisture in the oven and the skin doesn't get really nice and crispy. That's why you should now take out the roasting pan, place it high up on the rack, and ideally just put a baking sheet underneath so that all the sauce doesn't drip into the oven. Always be a bit careful with that because it's obviously very heavy and very hot now. And now I just take a meat fork, stick it into the goose and lift it back into the oven. Because it's now lying on a rack, the heat can reach all around the goose perfectly. It will also get crispy on the bottom, so there won't be any more soggy spots. I'll set up a pot with a sieve so I can strain the sauce immediately. As you'll see in a moment, the sauce has a lot of fat now. A goose has an incredible amount of fat around it. And we'll pour that through the sieve first, and then we can skim off some of the fat with a ladle. I'll show you that in a moment too. Be careful again because it's still very, very hot, of course. Now gently pour it through a sieve like this. Don't waste anything. It's all great flavor. And now we'll go back and refill the roasting pan with a small splash of water. Because there's still an incredible amount of stock from our sauce in there and we definitely don't want to waste that. That's why we take a small splash of water and basically rinse it out again so that all the flavor really ends up in our sauce. Now pour the rest through the sieve. That can go now. It's pure waste. After 3 hours of boiling, it has no taste left. Now I'll show you in a moment how to degrease the sauce. That's what it's called. That means removing the fat from the sauce. You can also put a bit of the fat on the table later. Some people really like it when you pour a bit of fat over the dumpling or the noodle because it's simply a very good flavor carrier. For others, fat is just total horror. I also like it 1 or 2 spoonfuls, I'll show you. We can turn off the red cabbage now. It's beautifully glazed, as you can see here. Really great, shiny, wonderful. It has a great aroma and already smells really Christmassy with the cinnamon and juniper and everything else we put in there. It's really much, much better than, say, red cabbage from a jar. The goose needs 30 more minutes at a slightly higher heat, so we'll raise the temperature by 20 degrees. And we can also put the dumplings into the water now because they also need about 20 to 25 minutes in boiling salted water. And shape them a bit round. Because they were in the fridge, they have a bit of a pressure mark on the bottom now. Now the dumplings shouldn't boil like laundry, but just bring them to a boil once and then let them simmer gently. Just let them simmer. Because otherwise, if you really boil them hard, they might still fall apart somehow, and then you'll just have a potato soup. Dumplings are a very reliable side dish because they actually show you themselves when they're done. When the dumpling rises and floats on the surface, then they're done. Reduce the heat so it gently simmers with slight bubbling. Now we can start on the sauce. The fat floats on top because it's lighter than water, and that's why we can now use a flat ladle to skim off the pure fat from the top really nicely. Let's set this aside here. As you can see, a goose like this has a lot of fat. If you were to eat all of that, you might end up feeling pretty sick afterwards. Now we've finally reached the sauce. We're also going to bind some of that fat into the sauce using this potato starch. But only use a little, or it will be too heavy. Always stay near the surface so you don't waste any of the precious sauce. And if you feel like there's not enough sauce, just add a splash of water and top up the sauce a bit. That's no problem at all because the flavor is very, very intense. You can stretch it out a bit. And as you can see from the whole pot of sauce we've ended up with a whole pot of fat. That's why we definitely need to remove it. And now at the end, when the sauce is practically just below the surface, it's always a good idea to make a circular motion here in the middle. Then the fat collects at the edge, and then you just catch the rest of the fat against the direction of the swirl like this. So now we've reached the sauce. I'll leave the rest of the fat in there because I don't want to waste any more sauce. You can see it now, it's already mixing directly with the fat. And now I'm going to bring it to a boil so I can thicken it again with this starch mixture. I'll thin it a bit with a splash of water, especially with a goose like this and a dumpling. You really need a lot of sauce, that's the most important thing. There's nothing worse than running out of sauce. Often in restaurants you only get a small dollop. That's unacceptable. Everyone wants 100 or 150 milliliters of sauce. At the end, add a good splash of water again. The flavor is intense enough, so you don't need to worry. Now the sauce has come to a boil. Now we can thicken it with the rest of the starch water mixture. The starch always settles at the bottom there too. That means before you thicken it, stir it once, either with a whisk or with your fingers. Just a bit so you can feel that it has really dissolved well. Be careful not to add too much since we want to keep the sauce from getting too liquid. Add it gradually. Add a small splash, then stir. See how much it thickens, and if it's not enough yet, just add another small splash. Let it briefly boil occasionally, as starch thickens only at 80 to 90 degrees. And now you can already see how it's gotten a bit thicker. The sauce isn't quite thick enough yet, but it's almost there. Just a little splash more. Then it's done. Now we'll let it cook once more. I'll try it. Let's see if our little sauce turned out well. It still needs a little bit of salt, but otherwise it tastes really delicious. We can take our bird out now. I'll turn it off now. It's a nice golden yellow, and we don't want it to get too dark, so just turn it off at the end. Leave it in the oven until the dumplings and the sauce are ready, and then we can actually start plating. The dumplings are ready now too. As you can see, they're floating. They've come up, so we'll plate them at the end, so they're still nice and hot. Now let's quickly reheat the red cabbage. Everything on the plate should be really hot. That's always important. And when plating, you can already take a look. You don't necessarily have to put these spices on the plate. If you find something there, just take a little out, like the bay leaf, allspice, and so on. But it's not a big deal if your guests have to do that at the table, because it just adds a great flavor. You may not find everything you put in the red cabbage yet, but you can already take some out roughly. Everything is ready, so we can take the bird out of the oven now. Wonderful. Wonderful. Crispy and perfect, just right. Now I'll show you how to remove it. It's best to stick the fork in the back to hold it in place. Just a little bit, because it's really hot right now. You can really see how it's steaming. And then you have the backbone here, which is sticking out like this. And here you basically need to make a cut on both the left and right sides. Whoa. It's wonderfully crispy. Now you cut down here along the breast. And now you can carve out the breast wonderfully here. Smells wonderful. And now there's a small bone joint here. I'll show you that inside. You have to cut through there and separate the two bones from each other. Then you'll have a beautiful breast piece. The first cut, then right away the second breast half. Cut along there at the drumstick. Really nice, the juice is still coming out, cooked perfectly. And here we are again at the spot where we have to go through this bone. It goes easily. If it's tough, just wiggle the knife. You're not in the right spot. It really should go very easily. Okay, that's the second breast. And now the thighs. Of course, we really want to get all the skin. That's the most important thing. So that's why I'm cutting along under the skin now. And then make a lengthwise cut here. Now a little bit frozen stuff. And again, there's a spot where we have to go through the bone. It's down here. I can try to show you that. Here's the bone that goes away from the joint, and here we have to cut through so the leg comes off. So back here, right there. Wonderful. Now just cut through the little band up here. But here, a nicely separated first drumstick. And the second one as well. We need to move fast so nothing cools before reaching the table. a spot we have to get through. Wonderful. And now let's plate it up really quickly. Put a dumpling on the plate. Then top with our delicious glazed red cabbage. That smells very, very nice. Better not fill the plate so much and then put the rest of the ingredients in a small bowl on the table. That's nicer than having the plate so overloaded. And now we'll cut the breast here. So we make a little space. Then we have 2 nice crispy pieces from the breast here, or even 3. Over there. Then what I always really like is to put a little bit of the stuffing on top, because it's really wonderful too. The little apple also looks very nice and tastes excellent. Stir the sauce again, then add a few spoonfuls on top. They paint wonderfully. This is our Christmas goose. Enjoy your meal. Bon appétit.